이번 전시에 대해서 제가 그래도 기획한 기획자로서 잠깐 말씀을 드리면 하종현 선생님 작품을 보시면 초기에 저희가 전후에 굉장히 어려운 시대에 작가로서 어떻게 그 시대를 작가가 리프렉트를 반영을 해서 했고, 그다음에 우리나라가 발전하면서 그런 환경들을 작가들이 어떻게 하종현 선생님이 반영을 했는지를 보여드리고, 그러면서 항상 좀 페인터로서 화가로서 하종현 선생님은 그러니까 그 2차원적인 화면에서 벗어나려는 노력을 항상 하셨던 것 같아요. 그래서 초기 앵포르멜 작품을 봐도 실을 이렇게 붙인다거나 그런 거, 그다음에 아까도 계속 두 분 선생님께서 말씀하셨듯이 또 화면을 이렇게 잘라서 위빙을 한다거나, 또 탄생 시리즈 보면 거기에도 이렇게 그 실이 붙어 있거든요. 그리고 또 그 도시개발백서 시리즈를 보면 화면을 이렇게 울퉁불퉁하게 만든다거나 그런 것들을 항상 하셨었고, 그 다음에 70년대에 들어가서도 항상 이렇게 작품들에 뭘 붙이시거나 이런 것들이 있었던 것 같아요. 그래서 그 점이 좀 저한테는 좀 흥미로웠고, 또 한 점은 또 재료에 있어서 일상용품들을 이렇게 그러니까 예술가들이 쓰는 일상적인 재료가 아니라 뭐 실이라든지 세멘트 얘기 많이 하셨는데 시멘트라든지 또 그 와이어 같은 거, 이런 것들을 항상 그 철망 같은 거를 작품에 붙이는 그런 것들이 되게 재밌었어요. 그리고 마지막으로 이제 단색화 작업하시면서 우리가 배합법이라고 부르는 뒤에서부터 이렇게 페인트를 밀려서 하는 그 방식도 재밌지만, 저는 그게 그 프로세스, 아까 말씀하신 것처럼 프로세스와 어떻게 보면 퍼포먼스가 이렇게 연결되어 있는 그런 지점이 있지 않을까. 그래서 그런 것들이 좀 하종현 선생님 작품에서 되게 좀 흥미로운 점이었던 것 같습니다. 두 분의 얘기를 들으면서 너무 재밌었어요. 그래서 구겐하임의 여러 컬렉션에 있는 작품과 하종현 선생님, 그다음에 그런 세계적인 무브먼트 안에서 하종현 선생님의 작품을 비교하는 것도 재밌었고, 또 일본 작가들과의 비교도 되게 재밌었어요. 근데 하종현 선생님이 그 당시에는 한국이 너무 어려워서 지금처럼 해외를 가거나 정보를 알 수가 없어서 그 하종현 선생님 같은 경우는 그 파리 비엔날레도 초대를 받으셨지만 작품만 보내고 가시질 못했대요. 그래서 그런 변화가 하고 있는 세계의 흐름 안에서 작가가 그거를 다 알 수가 없는데, 그거가 그런 것들을 이제 이일 선생님이 한국에 65년도에 귀국하시면서 이제 세계의 흐름에 대해서도 좀 배우시면서 67년에 작품들이 굉장히 많은 변화를 하시게 됐던 것 같아요. 그런 것들을, 그리고 그 작품을 보면 되게 짧은 기간에 굉장히 많은 변화가 있어서 제가 보기에는 그런 세계 미술의 변화를 작품과 연결지어서 자기가 어떻게 이해하려고 하는 노력들을 하시지 않으셨나, 이런 생각이 저한테는 들고요. 그래서 이제 그거는 제가 이제 봤던 하종현 선생님에 대한 어떤 소회이고요. 오늘 강연을 들으면서 두 선생님들께 한 분씩 질문을 하도록 하겠습니다. 그 안희경 선생님 같은 경우는 초기부터 하종현 선생님 작품에, 그러니까 실험미술 준비 훨씬 전부터 하종현 선생님 작품에 관심이 있고 연구를 초기 연구자 중에 한 분이라고 생각이 들어요. 그래도 그리고 특히 초기 작품에 관심이 있으셨는데 어떻게 하종현 선생님 작품에 관심이 갖게 되셨고, 그다음에 구겐하임 컬렉션과 앞으로 또 구겐하임에서 컬렉션을 더 하시면 좋을 것 같아서 관심 있는 작품이나 그런 부분에 대해서 좀 얘기를 해주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
제가 영어로 대답해도 될까요? 네. So I did my PhD in related to Korean art, and one of my chapters was focused on Korean artists who exhibited at the Paris Biennial in the 1960s and 1970s. And so that's how I came to know Mr. Ha's work. And there were, I looked at many artists, but, and then when I began at the Guggenheim, but one of the first things I was taught at no training, they were like, we are buying this Park Sobo work and Ha Chong-Hyun work. You have to write a report. So I looked at the work and I immediately saw the Ha Chong-Hyun work and I said, this is not a Tanseka work. But I think they had purchased it thinking it was part of the Ha Chong-Hyun's, Tanseka kind of body of work. So immediately I thought, there's serious lack of scholarship around his practice before Tanseka. Why did they think that this work belonged to the Tanseka movement and within the context of minimalism in the Guggenheim collection? So of course I knew about, and I had done research on his earlier work before, but that's when I began to take real interest. And I think that's really translates back to the kind of work that I do at the Guggenheim, which is not only looking at what we're buying that comes into the collection, but looking at what already is there. How can we reinterpret this? Did we miss certain narratives? Did we miss certain connections that could make this work very interesting in kind of a new historical and socio-political context? So that's how my love for Mr. Ha's work came into play. And I love what you said about process, about his work. So you showed the picture as well, but the 1974 conjunction, the one of the earlier ones, the white, that belongs to Liam, I think. That's one of my favorite works. And I think the reason why I showed Richard Serra, it's not an obvious pairing, but I think Mr. Ha, what he was trying to do is get away from the confines of painting, right? And it's this constant interplay between two-dimensional and three-dimensional, and focus on process, like you said, almost performative. So I love that kind of little connection with Sarah and other artists from that period. Yeah.
네. 다 통역을 들으셨죠? 그리고 켄지 카지야 선생님께는 그 일본과 한국이 지금은 그렇게 옛날처럼 교류가 많지 않아졌는데, 특히 나카라 유스케 선생님 같은 경우는 한국 작가들한테 굉장히 큰 영향을 주셨던 평론가로서 한국에 많이 왔다 갔다 하시고, 또 그 동경화랑의 흰색전 같은 경우 정말 중요하게 많이 언급되는 현대미술에서 그런 전시였습니다. 그리고 제가 오늘 발표 들으면서 이 한국의 하종현 선생님 작품뿐만 아니라 일본 미술계의 그런 움직임과 모노화 작가들의 움직임, 그리고 그때 하종현 선생님 봤던 거를 어떻게 선생님이 연결시켜서 또 생각하시고 한국 미술계에 또 발표하시고 그랬는지를 들으면서 되게 중요한 발표였다고 생각이 들었습니다. 제가 질문하고 싶은 거는, 요번에 이런 연구를, 되게 중요한 연구를 해주셨는데 그 당시에 특히 다카하라 지로에 대해서 아이오랑 초기 작품에서 아이오랑 다카하라 지로 작품 언급을 해주셔서 되게 했다고 생각이 들어요. 그리고 다카하라 지로가 한국에는 많이 안 알려져 있는 작가인데 그 당시에 한국 여러 작가들, 뭐 김구림 선생님이라든지 뭐 다른 작가들 작품을 봤을 때도 되게 중요한 작가라고 저는 생각이 드는데, 그 부분에 대해서 조금 더 언급해 주실 게 있으면 좋을 것 같습니다.
Thank you for your question. There are well-known monoha artists like Liu Fan, Sekine Nobu, Sugaki Shio, but they have other artists who are associated with the movement. So it's a more maybe there are more artists who are related to this movement, like Honda Shingo and maybe Nagamatsu Yuzo. But some of the artists stopped making art, and people forgetting their names. But if you do some archival research, there are a lot of artists who are making art with a similar purpose, similar concept. So yes, so but maybe I think and also so I think there are more names who are related to Ha Chong-Hyun and other Korean artists, but so but I just surprised that Takamatsu Jiro is not famous in Korea.
No.
Okay.
I admire his.
Okay, I see. Okay, because Takamatsu is one of the legend, especially in the early 1960s Japan. So every artist want to beat him. So, but after monoha artists appeared, his influence is getting diminished. So
I mean, Ha Chong-Hyun's relationship with him is also important, but also Kim Gu-rim, especially Kim Gu-rim and Kim Gu-rim's work, I can see the influence from his work. This is not related to the Ha Chong-Hyun, but yeah. So I was curious about how you can see the relationship with Jiro and with the white plain, urban planing on white paper. That is
okay.
only one you can see, or other works, maybe shadow of the.
There are a lot of tricky art, especially in the early 1960s Japan. But as far as I understand, there's only one painting by her using this kind of optical illusion, right? So I'm not sure how was aware of the Japanese trend, but yes. So.
I have a question. So when so during the time that he went to Japan to do shows and stuff, who was his community? Who was he close to any artists like as friends or?
I think in the beginning was Li Huan was the
Yeah,
one
was
who
the main, but I think
but
beyond that,
later
were there any kind of particular Japanese friends or the kind of community
he
that?
speaks Japanese.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
he speaks Japanese, and I think Liu Fan was his first contact. But I think Sekine Nobu also yeah, is a friend of her. I think her friend. So I think her has friends in Monoha artist circle, and there was a publication published by Kamakura Gallery, maybe in 1997. This publication includes a timeline of monoha artists when this artist make this work, and so this timeline is very popular, and I just found that Ha's name in this timeline. So maybe I think monoha artists think Ha is one of their colleagues or one of their associates or friends, I think so. And and also I think art critic Minemura Toshiaki knows her very well, and he wrote a couple of essays on her. Maybe, yeah. Maybe I could find some other names if I do some archival research, but at this moment, yes, I just say, yeah, Minemura Sekine.
그러면 이제 혹시 관객 중에 질문이 있으면 질문 받겠습니다. 우선 정현신 교수님께서.
네, 너무 흥미로운 발표였고요. Shall I or can I speak in Korean? Okay. 우리말로 통역되네요. 네. 저기 1968년도 한국 회화전이 이제 굉장히 중요한 전시인 것 같아요. 전시인 것 같고 아까 이제 그 말씀하신 그 세키네 노부오가 한국 오는 거는 1974년도 12월 20일 날부터 24일까지 조셉 러브하고 세키네 노부하고 일본에서 이제 와서 야마모토 사장하고 와서 한국에서 박소보도 만나고 같이 경주도 가고 제 생각에는 하종현도 다 봤을 것 같아요. 왜냐하면 그 당시에 그 앙대빵당 전시가 있었는데 이러한 전시에서 김그림 작품이라든가 모든 걸 다 보고 이제 가서 75년도에 흰색전을 한 것으로 보입니다. 그래서 조셉 러브도 이제 굉장히 중요한 한국 하단가는 중요한 신부이기도 했던 비평가인 것 같아요. 근데 제가 오늘 그 켄지 카지야에게 좀 선생님 교수님께 여쭙고 싶은 것은 1968년도에 한국 회화전이 있을 때 이제 사진을 보며 제 아카이브스를 좀 찾아봤는데 그 당시 아쉽게 이제 하정현 선생님이 일본을 가진 않았던 것 같아요. 그 사진에 보면 이제 이완 선생님하고 이런 사진들이 좀 있더라고요. 사진이 있는데 68년도에 그 동경에서 이제 전시가 있기 전에 일주일 전에 심포지움이 열렸다고 해요. 저도 그 일본 자료를 찾아보지 못해가지고 이제 켄지 선생님께 여쭙고 싶습니다. 그러니까 그 워크숍을 했는데 그 일본 비평가 중에 이제 이분 이름이 혼마 마사요시라는 이제 분인데 이분이 그 당시에 뮤지엄에 그 큐레이터는 아니었지만 약간 큐레토리얼 매니저를 하신 분인 것 같아요. 근데 이분이 그 워크숍을 주최를 해서 한국에서 오신 이제 작가들과 함께 워크숍을 했어요. 워크숍을 했는데 이제 이완이 보기에는 그 당시에 이완과 박수보와 하종형이 이제 처음으로 이제 다 대면하게 되는 그런 전시였는데 이 이완이 보기에는 한국 작가들은 너무 오프적이다라는 이제 그게 일본어로 이제 되어 있는데 한국에서는 이 오프를 이제 우리는 옵아트적이다. 근데 일본에서는 오프적이라고 이제 일본식으로만 발음이 돼 있더라고요. 또 옵아트적인데 이 옵아트가 이제 유한이 생각하기에는 한국 작가들은 너무 직관적인 것만 있고 좀 논리적인 게 부족하다. 그렇게 이제 그 워크숍에서 크리틱을 했고 그 당시에 이제 유영국 선생님이 그걸 듣고 예술이란 게 직관적이어야지 논리적이어야 되냐. 그래서 이제 좀 미완 선생님하고 약간의 이제 논쟁이 있으면서 뭐 논쟁이라기보다는 그래서 이제 그 이완 선생님께서 이렇게 부드럽게 답변하시고 그 해에 그 12월에 오광수 선생님이 이에 대해서 공간지 이제 글을 썼어요. 그래서 쓴 게 이거는 약간 세대 차이인 것 같다. 그런 이제 그 평가를 하셨는데요. 근데 이 1968년도에 그 전시에서 이완 선생님이 이제 풍경이라는 작품을 출품을 하셨는데 랜드스케이프이 지금 소실되어 있고 나중에 이제 전시가 되면서 리메이크가 됐는데 이 작품 이제 또 설명하면서 그 이완 선생님 그 작품이 그 풍경 작품이 그러니까 트릭 아트 아까 말씀하셨던 동경화랑에서 전시했던 그 트릭 앤드 비전이라는 전시하고 그다음 70년에 그 동경 비엔날레에서 했던 나카하라 유스케가 기획한 Between Man and Matter라는 그런 전시에서 보였던 그러니까 일본에서 약간 트릭 아트적인 그런 이제 그 영향을 또 유한 선생님이 설명하시는 부분들이 있더라고요. 근데 그 트릭 아트를 보면서 그게 이제 우리나라에는 나중에 약간 하이퍼 리얼리즘이 등장을 하면서 그러니까 약간 섀도우 같은 게 나오는데 한국 작가들에게는 그렇게 큰 영향을 못 미친 것 같아요. 오히려 이제 모노화라든가 이런 것들이 어떻게 보면 영향을 미친 것 같은데 그 트릭 아트라는 게 이제 어떻게 보면 옵 아트적인 경향도 있는데 근데 왜 일본에서는 이 트릭 아트라는 게 굉장히 그 60년대 중후반에 굉장히 관심이 많았고 근데 반면에 한국에서는 이제 기하추상이라고 해서 한 65년부터 70년까지 그 어떤 실험 미술이 나오기 전까지 4, 5년 동안 굉장히 인기가 있었는데 근데 정작 한국 작가들은 경향은 다르지만 모노화의 영향을 이완이 매개가 돼서 이완 효과가 있었던 것 같거든요. 근데 트릭 아트는 그다지 우리에게 그 교류는 있었고 그 당시부터 이제 65년부터 한국, 일본이 그 외교 관계가 성립이 되니까요. 그래서 68년이 참 중요한 것 같은데 그 트릭 아트가 왜 그렇게 일본인들에게 굉장히 큰 인기가 있었는지 그게 참 궁금해요. 그래서 아까 이제 발표를 하실 때 그 섀도우 이야기를 하셨는데 그 하정현 작품하고 그 비교하는 부분이 굉장히 흥미로웠거든요. 그래서 그 부분에 대해서 왜냐하면 나카하라 유스케도 그 전시에서 이제 그 물질에 대해서 이야기도 하지만 트릭 그 아트에 대해서 이제 68년도 뭐 그런 전시라든가 그런 경향이 옵 아트랑 일본에서는 어떻게 다르게 평가하는지 좀 설명해 주시면 그게 유사한 건지 궁금합니다.
Thank you very much for your question. It's very important. I've never think about that. So, but I'm not sure why trick art was so popular in Japan in the 1960s, but Takamatsu Jiro is one of the most important artists who promoted trick art trend. And Takamatsu is a kind of star artist in the early 1960s. He graduated from Tokyo University of Arts, especially from the Department of Oil Painting, which is very difficult to enter. So, but he embarked on experimental avant-garde movement. I think for Takamatsu, trick art is a kind of modernist idea, modernist approach to art, because for Takamatsu, trickery is a kind of essence of art. Of course, when you talk about painting, of course you don't see the each paint or support. We see the optical illusion through the surface. So trickery is a foundation of art. That's what Takamatsu thought. So I believe that it's a kind of Japanese interpretation of Clement Greenberg's modernist idea of essence of painting. But for Greenberg, he just focusing on painting rather than art. But for Takamatsu, he was interested in the broader concept of art. So and also many critics, including Nakahara Yusuke and Miyaka Atsushi and Ishiko Junzo, are fascinated by Takamatsu's proposition of trick art. So I think yes. So some of the critics are interested in trick art. That's why trick art was so popular in Japan. Also, other than Takamatsu, there are some artists who are influenced by Takamatsu. They form the group Genshoku. They are based in Shizuoka, and the artists from the Genshoku group display their works in the Twix and Vision show, because Ishiko Junzo moved from Tokyo to Shizuoka for his health, and he became friends with these artists. So yes, so I think critics' influence is important in Japan. And also a difference between tricky art and op art. In my understanding, trick art is not just about vision or optical feature. I think trick art is more about a concept, or how can I say? Trick art is not less interested in the disturbance of visual perception, rather than disturbance of kind of cognitive recognition. So, yes, it's okay.
감사합니다. 또 다른 질문 있으신가요? 네, 두 분이 계셔서.
Hi, my name is Kyung from Seoul. I have a question. I was happy to hear that you thought that Ha Chong-Hyun was coined as a tanseka was somewhat unfair, or should I say? Because I felt the same way. I have two questions. First one is, when I saw his work, I felt more reminded of Art Povera or even radical art from Italian 1960s and 70s movement. But I wonder, at that time, Mr. Ha was even informed of such movement. So do you see such relations or influence? And if you do, where do you think it's coming from? That's the first question. And second question is that he being coined as a 단색화 artist, is that a lack of research, or is that for the commercial purpose? I mean, this might be a little sensitive question to a certain industry, but I felt that somehow 1930s, 20s to 1940s born artists in Korea now begin to know is somewhat unfairly grouped as a 단색화. And I mean, in their artwork, collective artwork of Mr. Ha, for instance, I see somewhat, yes, there is monocolor, but it's more than that. His work cannot be, in my mind, fairly coined as a 단색화 because he did more than that. So what do you think about that?
To answer your first question, there are many existing texts on the type of information about contemporary art taking place in, outside Korea, on how that information traveled into Korea. So Sunjung mentioned, important figures like Lee coming from, Europe and coming in back to Korea. Liu Fan was a very important, medium, an intermediary between. He often wrote about Japanese, what was happening in contemporary Japanese art scene in magazines like Kongan. The Hongik University publications contained information. Konganji also, the AG artists' self-published journals contained information about the about what was happening outside, and it was very diverse. So, you know, you mentioned the Hakone, you know, open air park. There was an article on that in Kongan, right? I think the the biennial in 1970 was very important. A lot of artists from, you know, when attitudes become form, like those Kunelis, kind of arte povera artists were included in that show. I'm sure Korean artists, you know, knew about that exhibition. So I think there were many channels through which, you know, Mr. Ha definitely, and he was part of AG, so he would have had an opportunity to receive kind of information on the artist. I know that a lot of people talk about the connection between experimental art and arte povera. I deliberately didn't include that because I think with his earlier work, I think there are many more interesting connecting points. You know, especially if you see the work upstairs, I think yes, it was both post-war, yes, the use of materials, everyday materials, but I don't think the sensibilities were quite different. And I wanted to highlight kind of other through lines that you could find through his earlier practice. But definitely, I think you can find connections there. Artists themselves, his friends also travel. He went to Japan, you know, Korean friends traveled to Paris. They traveled and they bring information back. So I think what was interesting about the 60s and 70s is this, first of all, desire for information, and then whether it's interpreted correctly or translated correctly, that's another problem. I think there was it's a moment of what you would call globalization with a small g before this, what we now think of globalization with a big G. There's this kind of a moment of that's very pivotal for contemporary art scene globally. Yeah.
단색화를 아트포베라랑 연결시키는 거는 하정현을 단색화라고 부르는 거에 대한 크리티사이즈 하는 거랑 똑같은 것 같아요. 왜냐하면 사람들이 쉽게 재료를 아트포베라에서 일상적인 재료를 쓰기 때문에 그걸 연결을 쉽게 시키는데, 자세히 살펴보면 그리고 에이지의 그 연구들, 그 전할에 있는 연구를 보면 그 당시에 크리스토도 연구하시고 랜드 아트도 빅 아티클이 있고, 여러 가지 그 당시에 일어난 여러 가지 움직임에 대해서 작가들이 어웨어하고 그거에 대해서 알고 싶고 그런 연구들이 있었고, 그런 것들이 다 합쳐져서 이 작가들이 작업들이 나오고 있었는데, 그거를 그냥 아트포베라라는 한 장르로, 그리고 그 당시에 유행했던 연결짓기 쉽게 만드는 그런 게 보는 게 좀 저는 맞지는 않다고 생각하고요. 후기에는 단색화 작업을 굉장히 오래 하셨기 때문에 단색화 작가는 맞죠. 초기에 여러 가지 실험 작업을 했던 거고, 그래서 선생님이 단색화 작가가 아니라고 얘기할 수는 없는 것 같아요. 네, 그래서 그런 것들을 좀 시기별로 다르게 보고, 우리가 크게 이렇게 보기에는 단색화 작가라고 할 수 있지만 초기 실험을 보면 단색화가 나오기까지 여러 연구들이 있어서 그게 나온 거기 때문에 지금 전시는 그 앞에 단계를 보는 전시고, 그 이후에 선생님이 그 어떤 언어가 만들어진 이후에, 그러니까 언어가 만들어지기까지는 작가들이 여러 실험을 하면서 자기 언어를 그러니까 비주얼 언어를 이렇게 발전시키는데, 그거에 따른 여러 연구들이 있었고, 그 언어가 이제 단색화의 어떤 언어가 만들어져서 그 다음부터는 이제 단색화 작업을 그 이후에 74년부터는 여태까지 하시고 계시니까 단색화라고 부르는, 거기에도 선생님은 매번 다른 연구를 하고 계시기 때문에 그 연구도 또 후속으로 또 앞으로 일어나야 될 연구라고 저는 생각합니다. 그리고 두 번째 질문.
아니, 정답인 것 같아 그게. You said exactly what I want to say. Yeah. I think Ha Chong-Hyun is a Tanseka artist, right? He was affiliated with the movement. He's a very important pillar of that movement. But he's not only a Tanseka. His earlier works are much more expansive. And that's why you have to see the entire of the career, of the practice of the artist, the entire arc. And that's why I started looking into the earlier practice of the artist, because without that you couldn't get to what he did in the 70s with the conjunction series. So that's exactly what I would have said anyway. Yeah.
Hello. Yes. So I have a question about, I don't know if it's a question even, it's a thought process that I'm having right now. I was first, I became familiar with the work of Mr. Ha Chong-Hyun through the more newer artworks, especially the Red series, and I find that it's just extremely beautiful to me, right? And I think for me, this exhibition as well, and I know there was a seminar on his artwork a few months ago that I also attended. That's when I really learned more about the origins of his art, and the more brutal maybe or aspect of it. And I find it, I'm Polish originally, so different history, but also kind of a very limiting world for artists. And I'm thinking of Polish poster art, for example, how it came to be so beautiful coming from limitation. And I think also of Korean artists, also maybe Bae, who also worked with charcoal because that was the only thing that he could afford. And for me, there's this amazing beauty that comes from overcoming limitations. And so like we talk about art povera and daily materials kind of as a statement in a sense, but for me it's, when I think of Ha Chong-Hyun, I think of how innovative he is in so many ways, and that's kind of a focal point for me. And he takes that and he creates so much beauty out of that limitation. So I think also probably because if you look at the canvas, you know, obviously I'm from the West, so I'm familiar with the canvas. And the way I see canvas used by him or Yoon Hyung-in, for example, right? How the oil spreads and how it creates stains, or even your favorite work, which you mentioned, when actually the paint is between panels of paper, so that stain also is created, right? All of that is very beautiful. So I think for me, that's kind of what I think of when I think of this artist. And I was curious, because there are so many things to analyze in his work, right? How you think of that, how he overcame maybe these limitations to create his own language. How important is that in his work, this innovation that he brings to the limitations that he works within? If that's a question.
That's a question for me. I mean, I think this was, there's the devastation of the war. Korea is a pawn in the global kind of Cold War stage. You have to think about the political and the economic situation of the country at the time. They were sending a lot of troops to Vietnam, and so yes, all artists I think were dealing with limitations in terms of materials and finding what made sense in terms of their everyday life, finding materials from the changing kind of realities, material realities, but also historical realities of their lives. So definitely, I think there is a connection there. But I think that's what artists do, right? They create from their contemporary, their current conditions. So Mr. Ha's work, I think, is very interesting. I love when you talked about the oil stains from the oil painting. I think one thing that I would love to think a little bit more about in terms of Mr. Ha's work is time. You talked about, Sunjung, you talked about action and kind of performance. I think there's time embedded in his work, that time and labor that people don't really think about. And that I don't think we've written about that a lot, but I think that's a very interesting kind of way to think about his practice, and could link the earlier practice to his kind of more monochromatic practice, because the oil, it stains, right? And so there's this pull of the gravity as well. But I think time is a very interesting element as a material for him that we haven't explored enough.
마지막으로 마지막 질문 받고요.
Thank you.
네.
I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the Paris Biennial, which both speakers talked about. And I'm kind of curious how the artists approached this show, because the image we saw with the three works, there's the Ha Chong-Hyun concrete bags piece, the Liu Fan Relatum piece, and then the other piece is Kim Gurim piece. Yeah. So the Liu Fan, this series continues until today, right? But the Ha Chong-Hyun piece and the Kim Gurim piece seem to be more experimental, more singular in their bodies of work. So I'm not sure if EA was involved to invite them to Paris Biennale, if that was the sort of connection, but it seems that working together as this group called, what was it called, Relational? They work sort of under this title. It seems in some ways was sort of an extension of the AG, but also Liu Fan being involved, who to my knowledge was not involved with AG, as a sort of Japanese and Korean combination. So do we know sort of what was the objective for these artists in this show, with Ha and Kim Gurim showing extremely experimental sort of one-off works, but Liu Fan showing this Relatum piece, which I'm unsure when he began that series, but
71년 그 비엔날레가 이완 선생님이 커미셔너여가지고
okay.
두 작가를 선발해서 세 작가가 같이 간 걸로 제가 알고 있는데 혹시 애들
It's a very big question. So, and many people, including Shim, you've written about this too. But the Paris Biennial was a very important platform for many artists, especially Korean artists. I think you have to think about Venice, Sao Paulo, and Paris Biennials at the time. So there was the Venice, and then there was Sao Paulo, which was the second oldest biennial. Then Paris Biennial was founded after the Second World War by the Paris, newly founded Ministry of Culture, and it was deliberately kind of international in its approach, and Korean artists from the second one onwards participated. So it was a very important honor and platform for artists. They all wanted to be included, and the selection process was very interesting. So in the 60s, it all happened at the beginning very haphazardly. Park So-bo actually played a very important role in the first one that they attended, that they were able to participate in. And I remember looking in the Paris Biennial archives, like they missed the shipment and they couldn't make the payments, and all the woes of being a impoverished country and artists individually trying to send works there. And then I think, Mr. Liu Fan plays a very important role. And the 70s becomes a very interesting moment, because then in 1973, Paris Biennial forms this international committee, and 71, and so then they have a Japanese, it's Minamura, right? In the commission, in one of the kind of international commissioners, and he asked Liu Fan to select works from Korea. So until then, it was the national commissioners sending work. So there would be the 비협을 영어로 뭐라 하지? Korean Artists Association, Fine Arts Association would actually make the selection prior to that moment, and now it was these individual commissioners that would work with Korea to send work. So then in 1972, in Korea, they start this independent kind of like an exhibition platform where they could select the works to be sent abroad to represent Korea in these contemporary platforms. So it's a very complex, quasi-governmental, it's like a joint effort of many different people making it happen. But I do think it's very interesting that Mr. Ha and Liu Fan and Kim Gurim were in this kind of group, and I think there's not enough written things in English anyway, in Korean some more, about the role of Liu Fan with these experimental artists. They were very important. I think that relationship was very important. And then there were other artists also during that biennial that sent to. So that was a group work, and then there were other Korean individual artists who also sent to the Paris Biennial. Yeah.
많은 오랜 시간 이렇게 참여해 주셔서 감사합니다. 저희 전시는 4월 20일까지 열리고요. 그리고 5월 9일부터 그 다음 전시가 홍영인 작가와 그 다음에 10명의 스페인 작가들이 기후 환경 문제를 다루는 전시가 열릴 예정입니다. 네, 감사합니다.